There are moments in music history that nobody plans, nobody announces, and nobody fully understands until years later. This was one of those moments. A winter morning in Stockholm, a recording studio that smelled of coffee and cigarette smoke. 4 people who had once been 2 couples, now sitting in the same room, trying to make something beautiful out of something broken. And what came out of that studio that day became one of the greatest recordings in the history of popular music. But the story behind it, the real story, nobody told you that. That song was The Winner Takes It All, and this is the story of the day it was born. Before we go any further, imagine this. You have just gone through the most painful experience of your life. Your marriage has ended. The person you built everything with, the person you sang love songs with in front of millions of people, is now your ex-husband. And tomorrow morning, you have to walk into a recording studio, sit across from him, and sing a song he wrote about exactly what you just went through. In front of engineers, in front of the band, in front of microphones that will preserve every breath, every crack in your voice, forever. What would you do? Could you do it? And if you did, what would it cost you? Agneta Feltskog did it, and what it cost her became what made it immortal. The year was 1980. ABBA was still the biggest band on the planet, but the ground beneath them had shifted. Bjorn and Agneta had divorced in 1979. Benny and Annie Fried were still together, but barely. The 4 of them had agreed, professionally, to continue. The music was too important. The machine was too large to stop. And so they kept going. They showed up. They recorded. They performed. And they carried everything else in silence. Bjorn had been working on a new song. He had been writing it for weeks, maybe months. He didn't speak publicly about where it came from. He rarely does. But those who know him say that Bjorn Ulvaeus writes the way most people breathe, not as a choice, but as a necessity. And this song, this particular song, came out of him with an urgency that surprised even him. He brought it to Benny first, as always, because Bjorn had the words, and Benny had the music. And when Benny heard what Bjorn had written, he went quiet for a long time. Then he sat down at the piano, and within hours, The Winner Takes It All existed. But there was still the question of who would sing it, and everyone in that room already knew the answer, and nobody quite wanted to say it out loud. The song was about a marriage ending, about the dignity and the devastation of walking away from something you had built your life around, about the quiet strength it takes to say, I understand, even when you are breaking. It was written by Bjorn, but it was written about Agneta, and it needed to be sung by Agneta. There was no other way. The song would not have worked with any other voice, and everyone knew it, including Agneta. She read the lyrics. She took them home. She sat with them for a day, maybe 2, and then she came back and said yes. That yes is one of the most extraordinary moments in the history of popular music, and almost nobody knows it happened. The morning of the recording session, everyone arrived early. This was unusual. ABBA sessions were famously relaxed. People drifted in, coffee was made, ideas were tried and abandoned and tried again. But that morning, something was different. The engineers were already at the console. Benny was already at the piano. Bjorn was already in the corner with his notebook. And when Agneta walked in, the room went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with professionalism. She looked composed. That was the word people used afterward. Composed. Not cold, not distant, but contained, like someone who had made a decision and was going to honour it, regardless of what it cost. She went into the recording booth. She put on her headphones. She looked through the glass at Benny, at Bjorn, at the engineers, and she nodded. Ready. The track began to play. The piano, the understated production, the melody that Benny had built around Bjorn's words. And then Agneta opened her mouth. I don't want to talk about the things we've gone through. The engineer at the console later said that he had worked on hundreds of recording sessions, that he had been in the room for some of the most celebrated recordings of the 1970s, and that he had never, in his entire career, felt what he felt in that moment. He said the air in the room changed, that something came through that microphone that had no technical explanation, that it wasn't just singing, it was something else entirely. Benny's hands slowed on the piano keys. He was not playing live, the track was already recorded, but his hands moved anyway, as if the music was pulling something out of him. Bjorn turned toward the window, away from the glass, away from the booth where Agneta was standing. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The only sound in that studio was Agneta's voice, and the song Bjorn had written, and the space between the two, which was full of everything that had happened between them, and everything that would never be said out loud. Think about what was happening in that room. A man was listening to a woman sing about the end of their marriage, in a song he had written about the end of their marriage. And the woman was singing it, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with a quiet, devastating dignity that made it impossible to look away. This was not performance. This was not art in the abstract sense. This was two people, in the same room, processing something real through the only language they both still shared. The take ended. A long silence followed. Then the engineer said, very quietly, I think we have it. Nobody disagreed. Nobody suggested another take. Nobody moved for what felt like a very long time. Agneta took off her headphones. She set them down carefully on the stand. She walked out of the booth, and whatever she was feeling in that moment, she kept it entirely to herself. Because that was who Agneta Feldskog was. She gave everything into the microphone, and then she walked out, and she was composed again, contained, private, unreachable. The song was mixed, the album was finished, and when The Winner Takes It All was released in July 1980, it entered the charts like a force of nature. #1 in the UK, #1 across Europe, critical acclaim that bordered on reverence. Reviewers used words like devastating and transcendent and once in a generation. And none of them knew, not fully, what had actually happened in that studio on that winter morning in Stockholm. But you haven't heard the most extraordinary part yet. Because what happened after that recording session changed everything. When a song becomes that big, when it reaches that many people, something strange happens to the people who made it. It no longer belongs to them. It belongs to everyone who has ever lost something, everyone who has ever had to be dignified in the face of something undignified, everyone who has ever sat across from someone they loved and said, I understand, when what they meant was, I am devastated. The Winner Takes It All became all of those things to all of those people. And in becoming all of those things, it became something that Agneta and Bjorn could no longer fully claim as their own. It had escaped them, the way all truly great art eventually escapes its makers. But inside ABBA, the recording of that song had done something else, something quieter, something that took years to fully understand. It had drawn a line. Before The Winner Takes It All, ABBA was a band that made music while quietly managing the complexity of two broken marriages. After The Winner Takes It All, ABBA was a band that had turned those broken marriages into art. And there is a difference between those two things, a significant one. Because once you have turned your pain into art, once you have let the whole world hear it, the pain changes. It doesn't disappear, but it becomes fixed, permanent, public. And living with permanent public pain is a different thing entirely from living with private pain. Agnetha felt this more than anyone, because it was her voice, her divorce, her dignity, offered up to the world in 4 minutes and 55 seconds. And every time the song played on the radio, every time she heard it in a shop or a restaurant or drifting out of someone's window, she heard herself, at her most private, at her most exposed, forever. She never complained about it publicly. She never said it was too much. She was too private for that, and too professional. But those close to her during that period say that something shifted in her after the winner takes it all, that she became more withdrawn, more careful, more deliberate about what she gave and to whom. The tours continued. The album Super Trooper was released in 1980 and was another massive success. But Agnetha was increasingly absent from the promotional machine. Fewer interviews, fewer public appearances, less of herself offered to the world that had taken so much. And then, in 1981, the final piece fell into place. Benny and Annie Fried announced their separation. Both couples were now gone. The emotional architecture that had held ABBA together had completely collapsed. What remained was 4 extraordinary musicians who still made extraordinary music, but who were running out of reasons to keep doing it together. The Visitors album was recorded in this atmosphere, and Agnetha's performances on that record are among the finest of her career. There is a quality to her voice on those sessions that is hard to describe. It is the sound of someone who has nothing left to prove and nothing left to protect. She sings with a freedom that is almost frightening, as if the worst has already happened and she has survived it, and now the microphone is just a place to put the truth. Don't miss this detail. On the cover of The Visitors, 4 people stand close together, but their eyes point in different directions. Nobody noticed it at the time, but looking back, it is one of the most honest photographs ever taken of ABBA. 4 people, together, already gone. The last recording session happened in early 1982. Nobody announced it as the last. It simply was. The way most endings are, not dramatic, not ceremonial, just the last time something happens before it stops happening forever. Agnetha sang her final ABBA vocal that winter, in the same city where she had sung her first, in a studio not unlike the one where she had recorded The Winner Takes It All 2 years earlier. And when she was done, she went home, and the door quietly closed. For years afterward, people asked what had happened. Why had ABBA stopped? There had been no announcement, no farewell tour, no final interview where someone said, "This is it." Just silence. The kind of silence that answers every question by refusing to answer any of them. The truth, as it always is, was more complicated than the silence suggested. ABBA had not broken up because of one thing. It had dissolved slowly, the way glaciers dissolve, over years, under pressure, imperceptibly at first, and then all at once. The marriages, the tours, the fear, the pain turned into art. The art turned into something they could no longer look at without seeing everything they had lost. And Agnetha, more than anyone, needed to stop looking. She retreated to her house outside Stockholm, to Linda, to the quiet, to mornings without airports, and evenings without stages, and days that belonged entirely to her. And for a long time, the world let her go. The tabloids checked in occasionally. There were rumours, there were sightings. There was a brief relationship that ended badly and was reported worse. But mostly, the world accepted that Agneta Feldskog had decided to disappear. And it let her. What the world did not accept was that the music had disappeared with her. Because it hadn't. ABBA's songs kept playing, kept spreading, kept finding new ears in new countries in new decades. The Winner Takes It All played at 1,000,000 endings. Dancing Queen played at 1,000,000 beginnings. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, a generation that had never seen ABBA perform grew up knowing every word to every song. In 1999, Mamma Mia opened in London's West End. Agneta did not attend the opening night. She sent her congratulations and stayed home. But she listened. And what she heard was proof that something she had been part of, something she had given so much of herself to create, had outlasted everything. The marriages, the tours, the fear, the silence, all of it. And then, in 2021, Benny called, or Björn called, or both of them called. The exact sequence of events has never been fully reported, but somehow a conversation happened, and out of that conversation came an invitation to come back, just once, to make one more thing, together. Agneta said yes, again. She walked back into a recording studio for the first time in nearly 40 years. She put on headphones that felt both completely familiar and completely strange. She looked through the glass at Benny, at Björn, at Annie Frid. 4 people who had been young together, and famous together, and broken together, and now were old together, in the best possible way. And when the music started, Benny later said, it was as if no time had passed at all. The voices found each other the way they always had, instinctively, without effort, as if the 40 years between had been nothing more than a long breath, held, and now, finally, released. The Voyage album was released in October 2021. It entered the charts at #1 in multiple countries. Critics called it extraordinary. Fans called it a miracle. And Agneta, in a rare and careful interview, said that it had felt right, that the music had felt like coming home. She was 71 years old, and her voice was still the most recognizable thing about her, still capable of doing what it had always done, reaching into the chest of whoever was listening and pressing gently on something true. This is what The Winner Takes It All actually won. Not charts, not awards, not sales figures. It won permanence. It won the right to exist forever, in the space between what people feel and what they cannot say. It gave a voice to every quiet ending, every dignified devastation, every moment when someone had to be stronger than they felt. And the woman who sang it, the woman who walked into that studio on a winter morning in Stockholm and gave the world something she could never take back, she won something too. Not fame, she already had that. Not success, she already had that too. She won the right to be known, really known. Not as a pop star, not as a beautiful voice in a sequined costume, but as someone who had lived something real and told the truth about it in the only language she had. The stage lights may have gone out, but that voice, that particular, unrepeatable voice is still ringing. And somewhere in Stockholm, a woman who once